I gotta do some work, so I'm doing a spot check. I got this book here, Drowning in Oil by Lauren C. Steffi. I don't really know who she is, but let's see what's got going on. First thing I opened up to, page 121, and this is what it says. The CSB, which I understand is the Chemical Safety Board, didn't stop with its criticism of BP. It also turned a harsh light on the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the government's agency charged with inspecting workplaces and protecting workers. In the aftermath of the explosion, OSHA cited BP for 300 willful violations at the refinery and slapped it with a fine of almost $21.5 million, which was a record for the agency at the time. The CSB pointed out, however, that OSHA hadn't conducted a planned inspection of the refinery in 6 years. A Houston Chronicle review of OSHA records had found that unplanned or, quote, surprise, end quote, inspections at BP and other Houston area refineries had lapsed for 5 years. I don't believe that's true. I don't think they had lapsed for 5 years. I think that there is a high level of corruption involving OSHA specifically. When I was trying to get my non-destructive testing certifications, I was told that the only insurance one had to worry about in the gas and oil industry had to do with errors and omissions. I tried to inquire, what is errors and omissions insurance? Wasn't very forthcoming during class. Outside of class, the reference I found for errors and omissions insurance was part of a report that was released by the FBI in 1985, discussing errors and omissions and considerations of errors and omissions insurance connected to allegations of wire fraud. What would errors and omissions insurance have to do with wire fraud, as was reported by the Federal Bureau of Investigation concerning its investigations of racketeering in the 1980s, as cross-referenced with certification and non-destructive testing connected to the gas and oil sector? I'm also understanding that when it comes to certain standards, the only reference point that one is given, at least in Texas at the time and at least subsequently to that, is regarding OSHA. Now, I've attempted at least one time, formally and officially, to contact OSHA about a very serious concern. In the time I've been here, it's going on 4 years now, in all of my efforts at reporting, including reporting in information I might have connected to explosions involving tankers or oil tanks or chemical refinery facilities in the state of Texas. I'm not even going to talk about outside the state of Texas, but specifically in the state of Texas. Why has nobody saw fit to investigate whatever would be the underwriting on the insurance policies for the facilities where these explosions occurred? This isn't errors and omissions insurance. Is it connected to wire fraud? I believe it is. And if it's connected to wire fraud, then it behooves somebody to understand and find out who is being used as a derivative financial product in consideration of the underwriting and or affiliated products connected to insuring facilities where the gas and oil sector are located. If nothing else, the reason that there are no surprise inspections, I believe, has to do with their concept of risk management. See, I bought a book, an official book. It was written by an official person who used to work, if I'm not incorrect, for Shell Oil. He was involved in coming up with a concept of pipeline risk management. I bought the book. I looked through it. I read through it, his concept of what it means to actually deal with the full cycle of gas and oil refining when it comes to risk factoring. His second edition of that book was produced right before the invasion in Iraq. And I contend that whatever he specifically, and people like him that were actually involved with pipeline management, including considerations of risk factorization in terms of the full spectrum of pipeline management, got sabotaged and undermined as part of whatever else they were trying to do with the war in Iraq and its concurrent situation connected to the gas and oil sector. Now, is this in some way connected to all of the matters that were going on that were pegging the gas and oil sector for a form of risk leveraging connected to the nuclear energy sector? I believe it is. I believe it's part of the abuses of the Department of Energy and all of these people that don't actually have any practical experience in being subjected to the kind of high stakes financial speculation that underpins their priorities when they're discussing safety connected to gas and oil facilities, much less nuclear facilities or any facilities that would be connected to any of the derivatives associated with the nuclear energy sector. I'm not even talking about weapons yet. I'm not even talking about nuclear weapons. I'm not even talking about radiological weapons. I'm not even talking about chemical weapons. I'm merely talking about the primary processes connected to assuring the safety of facilities where gas and oil is refined and or facilities where nuclear energy is produced. Now, why would OSHA not engage in inspections, including planned inspections, much less surprise inspections? I believe it has to do with the manipulation of the concept of risk management. That when you have a benchmark and it's not met, that default gets characterized as a liability, and somebody allowed for these cowboy wannabes to accrue excessive, unnecessary liabilities because they use that as leveraging in their manipulation of their concept of risk and risk management. And if they can create a wider margin or a wider field to work with, and they can skew it, then the payoffs can be that big. And it's a lot easier to get away with that when you set up a program whereby the federal government is spending trillions of dollars to ensure things that are allowed to be characterized in a particular manner. And then if you get that involved with the government to do it, you can set up a period of time during which people can compartmentalize the things associated with that, recharacterize it as a specific kind of insurance product, and then create a private sector based on providing that specific private kind of insurance for that specific component. And then over time, if you've got enough people cooperating with you, and you're able to strong arm enough people in the industry out of the industry so that they can't hold you accountable, people like actual inspectors, people that do actual legitimate risk management, people that are actually involved with pipeline safety. And then you can pair that with a healthcare sector that does the same. It gets out the people that are dealing with compliance. It gets out the people that are dealing with actual safety around products. It deals with people that are actually dealing with standards related to human test subject experimentation and clinical trials. Then over time, you can compartmentalize it into private sector services or smaller compartmentalized component products that can then be dissipated. So your risk gets dissipated. Instead of having to deal with one facility and or one company, you can subcontract it with a bunch of private providers concerning specific componentized products. And so if something happens, then it is about a particular kind of product line that can be addressed in that manner, rather than having to deal with the fact that you are responsible for a facility of that sort. If something happens with a particular element of your pipeline processing or your specific kind of refining method, it's a cyber insurance problem. If somebody is engaging in specific behavior on the job because of other things that are going on that are not being attended to, it can be another kind of workers-related matter that is about behavior of the people in the workforce and is not about the culture of the company. And it's not about the actual responsibility that the corporation has to maintain certain standards, including legal standards, including legal labor standards, and including legal environmental safety standards. And that's what's been happening. So I don't agree. I don't agree with that that assessment that that somehow OSHA was slacking off. The OSHA wasn't slacking off. I believe it was an insider situation. Who was in OSHA at the time that was connected to the kind of governance structure of the federal government that would have held people accountable for making sure. Because here's the thing, it's not just the companies that are able to accrue that for leveraging. It's also that the federal government accrues liability itself. It fails to perform important functions connected to compliance and assuring safety based on making sure that inspections are done on time. You know what that sounds like? An intentional setup to destabilize the solubility and the solvency of the federal system so that it is more available for privatization after it fails to meet benchmarks related to actual performance. I'm not talking about how diversified your workforce looks. It's about talking about how competent people are in actually performing their roles. And if you can make sure that you spend 20 years diverting that into some other focus, while all of that accrues, then you get to a point like right now where what you have is this concept of, well, what looks more attractive as a troubled asset? Are you going to keep investing in this failed system, or are you going to go into this failed system after it's able to legally rebrand or remarket itself because it's been able to offload a bunch of toxic assets, and it's a lot easier to offload those toxic assets when you have a state of emergency where the government has to step in order to assist with public health safety. No, we're not dealing with public health safety right now. So what are we dealing with? What are we dealing with today? See, OSHA would have been an appropriate intercession in actually addressing this as a public health safety matter. But why wasn't OSHA doing those inspections? Let me ask you, who's qualified to do those inspections? How do you get qualified to do those inspections? Because let me tell you what it means. It means you have to sleep with at least a couple of people in order to make sure they get their contracts hooked up. And it means you have to help a bunch of other people figure out how they're going to pass that first drug test because the legislation is still pending on making sure they don't even need a drug test to get the job. And that's just two standards I didn't meet, right? And that's why I don't have a job right now, right? Don't you think an inspection of a facility that does something like gas and oil refining, or that does something like provides the essential materials necessary for actually providing the energy at all those hospitals and clinics, don't you think that's important? Wouldn't that be considered an essential service? Wouldn't that necessitate certain standards be met? So why were the benchmarks that I was expected to meet making sure somebody else got marijuana legalized and making sure that money was laundered by confirming it with an actual sex act? Those should never have ever been considered in conjunction with what my role was in your pipeline management scheme. You're a very, very bad manager.